There's a number that the National Weather Service in Chicago published this Monday, April 20th, 2026, that belongs at the front of every weather conversation happening in this country right now. And it is not a tornado count, not a wind speed, not a flood crest level. It is 10.63 inches. That is how much rain has fallen at O'Hare International Airport in Chicago between March 1st and April 20th, 2026, a span of 51 days. The average rainfall for that same period, based on the full historical record, is 66 inches. Chicago has received more than double its average spring rainfall. And the number 63, is not simply a statistical outlier or an impressive accumulation. It is a first. The first time on record, in all of documented Chicago weather history, that the city has exceeded 10 inches of rain in the March 1st through April 20th window. The previous record, 84 inches set in 2013, didn't survive the spring of 2026. Neither did the 4-event average. The National Weather Service Chicago Field Office published a formal statistical bulletin on April 19th, documenting that, as of that date, the Chicago forecast area had already recorded 11 Pacalmas, individual severe weather events producing at least one report of tornadoes, damaging winds, damaging hail, or flash flooding in 2026. The historical average for that same January through April period is 11 versus 4, and NWS Chicago did not stop there. The bulletin documented that the SPC had outlooked at least part of the Chicago forecast area for severe weather on 15 separate days so far in 2026, against the historical typical range of 4 to 8 days through the end of April. And as of April 19th, the Chicago office had issued 128 tornado and severe thunderstorm warnings. 128, a record high for that office through April 19th in any year in the documented record. This is the landscape. The already saturated, already record-breaking, already exhausted to the limit landscape. The two large storms are now marching toward, not one, two, arriving in sequence, each with its own character, its own geography of destruction, its own separate set of hazards to deliver, and the corridor sitting between them, the brief quiet window of Monday and Tuesday, is not a recovery. It is a loading dock. The first storm is already here. The WPC's short-range forecast discussion published Monday, April 20th, confirmed it. A deep Pacific upper-level trough and its associated surface frontal system are continuing to progress inland along the west coast, bringing increasingly widespread precipitation as it moves eastward. What makes this storm worth the word large is a specific technical detail buried inside the WPC's probabilistic heavy snow and icing discussion from the same day. GOES West satellite imagery captured a large, closed upper-level low, slowly spinning over the eastern Pacific, and the WPC described its depth with a number that meteorologists reserve for truly anomalous atmospheric features, 500 milliliter heights falling to the 5 percentile level of the CFSR climatology, 2.5 percentile. That means the upper-level trough now driving the Pacific storm ranks in the most extreme 5% of all equivalent upper-level features ever recorded in the satellite and reanalysis data that defines the modern climatological baseline. This is not a routine Pacific system delivering a few inches of rain to the California coast and moving on. It is an anomalously deep, closed low, the kind of feature that meteorologists have documented a habit of producing outsized impacts across the terrain it crosses. The Sierra Nevada is the first test. The WPC placed the probability of 12-plus inches of snow accumulation across the highest terrain of the Central Sierra at greater than 70% for the 24-hour period ending Wednesday morning. Interstate 80 and Route 50 mountain passes face 30 to 40% probability of significant accumulation. San Francisco Bay Area is receiving wind, heavy rain, and potential thunderstorms with small hail through Tuesday. The Great Basin and Intermountain West will absorb the system's moisture through Tuesday and Wednesday, delivering widespread low-elevation rain and high-elevation mountain snow across Nevada, Utah, and Idaho. Strong gusty winds are arriving with the system across the west and will persist across the plains through Thursday. And then, as the system ejects out of the Rockies and transforms from a deep Pacific closed low into an amplified continental mid-level trough tracking across the northern plains, the first storm hands off to the second. The second storm is the one that every piece of severe weather forecasting infrastructure has been pointing at since the April 17th day 4-8 outlook first identified it, and the SPC's updated day 4-8 guidance published on Monday, April 20th, has now defined its architecture with enough confidence to describe its specific behavior in technical detail. The discussion language deserves to be read exactly as the SPC wrote it, because it tells a precise and important story. The outlook states, on Thursday, day 4, a lobe of vorticity will rotate around the closed mid-level low across the northern Rockies. This will reinforce a surface cyclone as it moves north into Canada. As this low moves north, a combined dry line and cold front will move east into an increasingly moist environment across the Central Plains. The air mass ahead of the front should destabilize during the day Thursday, with Nukipi values over 1,000 joules per kilogram possible into portions of Minnesota. Thunderstorms should develop across portions of northeast Kansas into Iowa during the late afternoon as height falls overspread the surface front. These storms will quickly build southward along the front into portions of Oklahoma and southern Kansas. And then the SPC describes the specific evolution that makes Thursday's setup distinctive. Kinematic fields initially should support supercells, but mid-level flow will increasingly become parallel to the front, suggesting that storms will grow upscale into one or more linear segments. This is meteorological language for a storm that begins as organized supercells capable of producing long-track tornadoes and large hail, and then consolidates into a bow echo or squall line capable of producing widespread straight-line wind damage. Both phases are dangerous. The transition between them is unpredictable. The communities in the path of Thursday's outbreak, northeast Kansas, Iowa, southern Minnesota, portions of northern Missouri, will face first the discrete supercell threat with tornado potential, then the accelerating linear segment threat with 60 to 90 mile per hour wind gusts, potentially within hours of each other. The front augmented by convective outflows will continue pushing south and east overnight Thursday into Friday before stalling. And that stall is what makes Friday the second most dangerous day of the week. Friday's setup is described by the SPC in terms that should arrest anyone's attention who has been tracking what the spring of 2026 has already produced. The outlook language for Day 5, Friday, April 24th, states the surface front will stall out across the greater Arletex region. Forecast soundings along and ahead of the frontal boundary indicate an unstable, uncapped environment with vertical shear between 30 and 40 knots, which should support additional severe thunderstorms. Friday afternoon into the evening and overnight across portions of eastern Oklahoma and Arkansas, unstable, uncapped. This is the two-word combination that severe weather forecasters have learned, through painful experience, is the most dangerous state and atmosphere can occupy heading into an afternoon with 30 to 40 knots of deep layer shear. An uncapped environment means there is no atmospheric lid preventing storm development, no stable layer of warm air, suppressing convective initiation in the way that caps limit severe weather on most marginally unstable days. When the cap is absent and instability is present, storms develop wherever the surface forcing organizes them, which means the threat is not confined to a neat geographic box. It spreads with every sea breeze boundary, every outflow boundary from earlier storms, every subtle wind shift along the stalled front. And the Arletex region, the corridor crossing eastern Oklahoma, Arkansas, Louisiana, and the Texas Panhandle, is a geography that most of the spring 2026 discussion has not flagged as a primary severe weather target. The previous week's outbreaks concentrated damage in Kansas, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, and Illinois. Friday's stalling front is pointing at communities that have not been in the center of this season's geographic targeting, communities that may not have the same level of active engagement with severe weather preparedness that the communities of Rochester, Lena, and Marathon County, Wisconsin have spent the last week living in. When the atmosphere shifts its aim, the communities in the new target zone have less recent experience with being directly in the path. That is not a meteorological measurement, it is a human factors observation. And in a week, when the human factors are already heavily compromised, 50,000 plus homes and businesses still recovering from power outages across Illinois, Indiana, Missouri, and Oklahoma from last week's outbreak, Friday's stalling front is arriving into an emergency response landscape that is still running on depleted resources. Now account for what both storms will dump into a hydrological system that has already exceeded every historical baseline the Great Lakes region possesses. The first storm's moisture output adds to what is already inside the West Coast watersheds. The anomalously deep closed low at the 2. 5% depth is capable of producing locally more than 8 inches of mountain snow across the Absarokas, Little Belts, and Tetons. And the WPC specifically flagged the need to monitor for potentially impactful accumulations, dropping into lower elevations, Wednesday into Thursday. As that precipitation melts and drains into already high river systems across the northern Rockies and High Plains, it arrives at the front of the second storm's rainfall, which the WPC's extended forecast flags as including episodes of heavy rain, becoming more likely Thursday and Friday, as the trough's associated surface low interacts with surging Gulf moisture. The Climate Prediction Center has maintained its flooding possible hazard posting for the Great Lakes region and upper Mississippi Valley through the next 2 weeks. The Wolf River in Wisconsin, which ran a foot above its all-time record flood stage during the week of April 13th through 17th, was still in major flood as of Sunday, April 19th. The Muskegon River in Michigan, still in major flood. The Sheboygan County Sheriff's Office described a county where nearly every waterway had overflowed beyond its banks the previous week. Chicago, which just recorded 10, 63 inches of rain since March 1st, more than double the average. The first time in recorded history the city had reached that threshold, is now looking at the arrival of Thursday's severe weather system, with rivers and soils that have absorbed the wettest spring in the city's documented weather record and have no physical capacity remaining to accept another significant rainfall input without routing it directly into stormwater systems. Basements, underpasses, and the urban drainage infrastructure that was not designed for this level of sequential precipitation loading. The NWS Chicago area forecast discussion from Sunday, April 19th, already noted frost and freeze conditions arriving. Monday morning, after the passage of the cold front, trees that bloomed weeks early in the record March warmth now facing a freeze on the backside of the first storm, before the second storm loads severe weather for Thursday and Friday, killing frost, record flooding, 2 large storms, 4 days. 4. And behind both of them, the second storm's own outlook contains a detail that meteorologists note carefully when they see it, buried in the Day 6 language of the SPC's April 20th Day 4-8 discussion. By Saturday, the larger scale flow across the southern plains will begin to respond to a low latitude trough moving into Southern California by once again becoming increasingly southwesterly. Read that sentence again. By Saturday, the day after the second storm's Friday severe weather, a third system is already organizing off the Southern California coast. The atmosphere is not pausing between rounds to allow recovery. The SPC's current outlook flags Saturday and Sunday as predictability too low, which is not a forecast for quiet weather. It is a forecast that acknowledges a new system is beginning to organize, and that its specific track and intensity cannot yet be pinned down. Predictability too low is the SPC's way of saying there is something there, we see it on the models, and we do not have enough confidence in the details to draw specific risk areas. That classification has a history in 2026 of resolving within 48 to 72 hours into a significant severe weather event. Kansas City, the April 17th outbreak. Both began as predictability too low or low confidence setups in the day 4-8 period and resolved into the most significant severe weather days of the spring. The third system is currently where both of those were before they became emergencies. The NWS Chicago Statistical Bulletin published April 19th documented one other number that needs to be stated plainly as the context for what 2 large storms mean arriving into this specific week. As of April 19th, there have been at least 20 tornadoes in the NWS Chicago forecast area in 2026. The 128 tornado and severe thunderstorm warnings issued through that date represent a record high for that office through April 19th in any year. The SPC outlooking the Chicago area for severe weather on 15 separate days already against the historical 4 to 8 day range for the full January through April period. All of this happened before the 2 large storms now on the radar began their approach. The atmosphere, responsible for 63 inches of spring rainfall in Chicago, more than double the average, a first in recorded history, is the same atmosphere preparing to deliver storm number 1 from the Pacific coast, through the Rockies and into the plains, and storm number 2 from the plains through the Midwest, South, and Arletex corridor, arriving in sequence on Thursday and Friday of this week. The corridor sitting between them right now is quiet. It will not remain so. 2 large storms are coming. They are not hypothetical. They are documented, named, tracked, and described by the National Weather Service's own official forecast discussions in language specific enough to identify their mechanisms, their targets, and their hazard profiles to anyone willing to read it. The only question left is the one the communities in their path are answering right now, today, Monday, April 20th. While the ground is saturated and the rivers are still high and the emergency response teams are still recovering from last week. Whether enough of those communities are listening